Hey folks, tonight we're kicking off with the big boss, Homo neanderthalensis, the muscular, smart-ish cousins who not only survived the Ice Age, but probably hit the gym with it. From freakish strength to surprisingly decent interior decorating skills. Neanderthals weren't just cave dwellers, they were nature's gym bros. So before you get comfy, hit like and subscribe, only if you're into my weird little history rants. Of course. Oh, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. Love seeing the global crew tuning in. Now, dim the lights, turn on the fan for some white noise, and let's chill on tonight's journey. If you somehow ended up in Ice Age Europe around 80,000 years ago, you'd freeze solid in 30 seconds flat. But before that, you might spot a Neanderthal, the local hominin king, and probably the only creature on Earth ready to wrestle a mammoth. Neanderthals weren't just different from modern humans, they were built for hardcore survival. Picture a dude designed by a bodybuilding committee, Arctic engineers, and some guy obsessed with big foreheads. That's your Neanderthal. Let's start with their build. They were a bit shorter than me, about 5'4" to 5'6", but calling them short is misleading. Not tiny at all. They were stocky, broad-chested, so wide-shouldered, looking like skeletons pumped up on steroids, meant for demolition. Their bones, thick, dense, and way too beefy for anything gentle besides maybe mammoth wrestling. Their limbs were short, but insanely strong, perfect for holding on to heat in bone-chilling cold. Their hands big and beefy with thumbs made for crafting tools, grabbing prey, or opening pickle jars so tough modern humans wouldn't even try. And the face Neanderthals aren't the weird ones you are. Their skulls were long and low, with brow ridges so prominent they could double as ski slopes. Big noses pointed forward, probably acting like built-in air warmers for Ice Age breath. Strong jaws, barely any chin, and a forever ready-to-fight but kinda confused look. But don't get me wrong, they weren't just gruff brutes. They weren't a failed human prototype. They were a parallel success story, from head to toe. They were made for their world, and they thrived there. Neanderthals were endurance athletes of their time, surviving blizzards, cave bears, and spear hunting like pros. Every scar and crack on their bodies screamed, yeah, I broke a few ribs, no regrets. If you're proud of your bone strength after lugging a milk crate without wincing, sit down. Neanderthals were walking fortresses. Their bones didn't just hold up, they were built like medieval castles. Their thick femurs made modern human thigh bones look like cheap chopsticks. Speaking of legs, theirs were short but rock solid, not for marathons, but for climbing rocky mountains while hauling half a reindeer on their backs. Their knees were built to bend and flex non-stop, and squatting. Oh yeah, they nailed that too super handy when you spend most of your day lighting fires, crafting stone tools, or gutting giant beasts. Their arms, just as intimidating. Their upper arm bones were crazy thick, forearms even thicker, a Neanderthal exclusive. No flexing for Instagram likes here. They were born to wield heavy tools and drag massive prey across rocky tundra, if modern humans are Swiss Army knives. Neanderthals were eyebrow-equipped power drills. Even their chests tell a story. Modern humans have barrel-shaped chests tapering down at the waist. Neanderthals wide and flared chests, allowing for huge lungs, vital for surviving cold. Thin Ice Age air. Their respiratory system was basically an industrial fan, sucking in oxygen and pumping out mammoth hunting energy. And don't forget the skull, Not just those legendary brow ridges, though those are epic. Their skulls were longer, flatter, thicker, and had big muscle attachments. Translation: jaws and necks built like tanks. They could chew frozen deer meat without batting an eye. Fun fact, all that beefy skeleton came with a price. They grew fast and might have had shorter lifespans, but while they were alive, they packed in bruises, broken bones, and hard living like a prehistoric action star. Their bones show wear and tear, healed breaks, joint damage, and battle scars like they were auditioning for the first ever action flick. Now, let's talk about that big brain. Neanderthals had big brains, not just a figure of speech. Their brains were bigger than ours, about 1/350 to 1/500 cubic centimeters, while ours average around 1/350. Yep. Those rough cave guys had some serious brain power and didn't have to suffer through Excel spreadsheets. But before you crown them honorary professors, remember bigger doesn't always mean smarter. Blue whales have massive brains and still haven't invented indoor plumbing. That said, Neanderthals didn't just lug around heavy brains, they actually put them to good use. A big chunk of their brain was dedicated to sensory processing and motor skills, especially vision and movement coordination. Makes total sense when your daily agenda is stalking moose through a blizzard without falling off a cliff. They had to map out dangerous terrain, track animals for miles, and use tools all without Google Maps or a thumb-swiping Instagram. Their visual cortex was pretty huge, probably giving them superhero-level eyesight. Picture a bunch of Neanderthals squinting through snowstorms like Ice Age anime characters, just fluffier and with way fewer dramatic monologues. And sure, their frontal cortex, the think before you act, part might have been smaller than ours proportionally. But evidence shows they weren't just go-with-the-flow cavemen. Their lives demanded planning, teamwork, and some surprising creativity, like painting cave walls and maybe even using red powder as primitive makeup. So yeah, your Neanderthal ancestors might have been sculpting faces long before TikTok was a thing. These guys adapted impressively across Europe and parts of Asia, from dry grasslands to snowy tundras. Requiring some serious brain power, they figured out how to use local resources, build shelters, make tools, and occasionally invent new ways to hurt themselves with flint. Still unimpressed. Here's a kicker: we used to think all their tools and art were stolen from early modern humans. Then we found Neanderthal art and jewelry way older than anything Homo sapiens made nearby, turns out. We showed up fashionably late to the cave party. If nature had to survive the worst conditions imaginable contest, Neanderthals would not only win first place, they'd probably smash the trophy into a hammer too. These hominins didn't just survive the Ice Age, they were built for it. Imagine your nose hairs freezing. Then try living like that without heated floors, coats, or hot chocolate. Welcome to Neanderthal territory. They're stocky. Short bodies weren't an accident. It was smart design. That compact shape held in heat exactly what you need when your environment looks like a cursed supermarket freezer aisle. Thin, lanky limbs lose heat fast. Neanderthals' thick and short limbs, even penguins would nod at approvingly. Their huge noses, not for gossiping. Big nostrils warmed and moistened freezing air before it hit their lungs. It's like a natural air conditioner right on their faces, a handy adaptation and a perfect excuse for a face you could balance bricks on without them falling. Their skin probably helped too. We're not sure about the exact color, but most scientists agree they might have had lighter skin to soak up vitamin D in low light conditions. Because if you want to survive 6 months of endless gloom, you gotta squeeze every drop of sunshine from that gray sky. Their lungs were probably massive, too needed to fuel bodies busy all day climbing, hunting, hauling, chiseling, and occasionally inventing new ways to pull muscles. Their barrel-shaped chests, not for show, they were prehistoric heaters. Clothes. Oh, they had those. They didn't run around wrapped in random animal skins like some yard sale furniture. Evidence shows Neanderthals actually sewed animal hides to keep warm, and sewing isn't easy. It means planning, tool making, and probably some winter fashion and off-season stuff too. Long story short, Neanderthals weren't just barely scraping by in the Ice Age. They thrived. They weren't nature's weaklings. They were snowplows, grumbling softly while wondering why mammoths always overdo it. When you picture Neanderthal fashion, you might imagine a fur thrown over the shoulder, maybe tied with a vine and a wooden club in hand, looking clueless about what they're actually wearing. But real Neanderthal clothes were surprisingly sophisticated, primitive, sure, but more about function than style, and complicated enough to make medieval tailors scream. Honestly, Ice Age Europe wasn't the best runway for minimalist fashion. Stepping outside in winter, wearing just hope and good vibes, you'd freeze solid before you could say snakebite fail. So Neanderthals were smart. Proof shows they didn't just wrap skins like old couch covers. They tanned, softened, and stitched them with bone needles. Yep, they handcrafted outfits from deer and mammoth hides before buttons were even a thing, and didn't complain about it on Reddit. Speaking of accessories, some Neanderthal sites have eagle talons, pierced shells, and beads. These weren't just practical, they liked to dress up a bit too, maybe as symbols, or Ice Age bling. Imagine a Neanderthal rolling into camp like, yeah, this claw necklace caught the bird myself. No, you can't touch it. They also used natural red powder called ochre to decorate tools, bodies, maybe even faces. Was it war paint, decoration, or social signaling? No one's quite sure, but it shows at some point. One Neanderthal looked at a red rock and thought, this would look amazing on my cheekbones. So, are they ready for Fashion Week now? Probably not, unless the runway's covered in snow, lit by fire, and followed by an intense hunt. But their clothes did the job, kept them warm, reasonably dry, and shielded from the weather and nosy Homo sapiens alike. Don't forget the practical smarts, each outfit biodegradable, made from local materials, and obviously hunted. Now that's sustainable fashion, Ice Age style. Neanderthals weren't just tough, they were the type to punch a woolly rhino straight in the snout like their muscles had some cosmic gym membership from birth. Everything about their bodies screamed power, huge muscles, especially in the shoulders, arms, and legs, areas crucial for spear throwing, skinning beasts, dragging carcasses, and sometimes just pushing stones around for fun. Their bones, like tiny siege engines, meaning those muscles weren't for show, they meant business. But just how strong were they? Estimates say a male Neanderthal could be up to 50% stronger than a modern man of the same size, and in upper body strength, maybe twice as powerful. This wasn't dad strength or farm strength. It was superhero level tear down a cave entrance strength. They didn't just hunt from afar with careful spear throws. Nope. Neanderthals preferred the face-to-face approach. They'd charge right at those massive, pissed-off Ice Age beasts and stab almost nose to nose. Dinner prep was basically dodging elephant tusks while holding tight to whatever was trying to kill you. And the injuries, oh, they had plenty. Their fossils are full of healed wounds, broken arms, crushed ribs, head injuries, all showing they weren't just strong, but insanely tough. When a Neanderthal broke something, they either limped it out or wrapped it in moss and hoped for the best. Then they went right back out hunting, their grip strength terrifying. Some researchers think they could crush a modern human's hand without breaking a sweat. Thumbs bigger, fingers wider, joints that could double as medieval weapons. Imagine Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, but hairier and better at throwing stone axes. If Neanderthal fossils could talk, they'd scream life was brutal, not just for getting sunscreen brutal, but headbutting wild buffalo before lunch brutal. Their skeletons aren't peaceful prehistoric memoirs. They're more like accident reports from an Ice Age rodeo. Seriously, when anthropologists study Neanderthal injuries, they see something familiar: broken ribs, smashed arms, bruised faces, just like what you'd expect from a pro rodeo rider. And no, this isn't a joke. Turns out, if you're regularly wrestling ton-heavy beasts to survive, your bones tell a very particular story. Take Shanidar 1, for example. This poor guy got a head blow so bad it cracked part of his skull, probably blinding one eye, plus a withered right arm, likely from a broken bone that healed. His leg was injured too, basically. He was the prehistoric before shot in an orthopedic ad. And weirdly enough, this dude lived for years after all those injuries. That means other Neanderthals took care of him, because let's face it, even if you're a walking tank with one eye and a limp, your Ice Age buddies still save you a spot by the fire. Another famous case, La Chapelle aux Saints, an old guy with bad arthritis, missing teeth, and spinal problems, also clearly taken care of. So not only did Neanderthals get hurt in ways that would make modern safety inspectors freak out, they also healed each other, offering moral support and actual survival help. Survived Neanderthals said, "Yeah, we did both, but the injury rate also tells us how they lived. They weren't some distant hunters picking off tiny prey or gentle gatherers. They dove headfirst into danger, very up close and personal. Their main weapon was the thrusting spear, think stabbing, not throwing, and when you hunt like that, your dinner fights back. So next time you trip over your own feet and feel sorry for yourself, remember Neanderthals spent their whole lives getting slammed by Ice Age death machines, then smeared moss on their wounds and kept the fire burning. Survived Neanderthals were like, yeah, we did both. But how often they got hurt tells you a lot about their lifestyle. They weren't some distant bow and arrow types or gentle gatherers. Nope. These guys got up close and personal with danger. Their main weapon, thrusting spears, yeah, they stabbed instead of threw, and when you hunt like that, your prey fights back. So next time you trip and feel sorry for yourself, remember Neanderthals got tossed around by Ice Age death machines, then gritted their teeth, smeared on moss, and kept the fire burning to survive. And they lived long enough to invent self-care. Now that's resilience. Neanderthals didn't just survive the Ice Age, they brought the fire, prehistoric style, not throwing flaming balls or inventing s'mores, but straight up making, keeping, and weaponizing fire like Bear Grylls' Ice Age ancestors would approve. How do we know archaeology spots show clear signs of campfires, central fire pits with charred bones, heated stones, and layers of ash sometimes piled up for years in the same spot? This wasn't some random wildfire, it was Neanderthals picking the perfect spot, lighting up, cooking right there, probably glaring hatefully at the wind. the popular theory they sparked fire by striking pyrite stones, creating sparks to ignite dry grass or moss. No matches, no lighters, no YouTube tutorials, just raw determination and a suspicious pile of rocks. Ice Age's version of Hold My Beer. And fire wasn't just for warmth. It cooked their food, making chewing and digestion way easier. This wasn't just a culinary upgrade. It unlocked more nutrients, killed parasites, and might have given them extra time to invent other useful stuff like gossip. Plus, fire helped tool-making heating stones, made shaping and flaking tools easier. So yeah, Neanderthals were messing with heat tech way before modern humans even thought about pointless committees. Oh, and don't forget, defense fire scared off hungry beasts. Sitting by the fire wasn't just cozy. It was a temporary shield against the growls lurking in the dark. Picture Neanderthals roasting meat, swapping stories, and casting spooky shadows on cave walls. Fire was their home security system. Were they the first to discover fire? Maybe not, but they tamed it with calm, practical, and chill mastery. No bragging, just quietly turning cold caves into homes and tough meat into something a little less jaw-breaking. No Swiss Army knives, no tutorial clips, just a fire rock and a moment of peace. And they could whip up enough tools to skin a deer, build a hut, and maybe even pop open a medieval bottle of wine. Their tools weren't just sharp rocks. They were strategically crafted with detail, purpose, and just the right amount of controlled violence. Their main technique was levallois, a complex multi-step process, prepping a stone core to flake off predictably shaped pieces. Translation: they weren't just smashing rocks like toddlers. They planned ahead, shaped cores, analyzed angles, and executed precise cuts so sharp that modern archaeologists sometimes mistake their work for early Homo sapiens handiwork, which, honestly, must be annoying for those archaeologists. Neanderthal toolkits had scrapers, points, awls, drills, even composite tools, blades glued to wooden handles with tree resin and sinew. Not just sharp stuff. That's prehistoric composite tech. A fancy way of saying they invented duct tape, but way harder. They used these for everything: butchering, tanning hides, woodworking, and maybe even a little angry gesturing. Honestly, whoever figured out how to glue stone to wood with resin and had the patience deserves a TED Talk invite. Their tools varied by region too. That means Neanderthals weren't just copycats. They innovated, tweaking methods based on local resources, climate, and prey. One group used limestone, another flint. Some even experimented with bone and antler tools, like a prehistoric Etsy marketplace, and they weren't afraid to improve over time. Their tools got sleeker, more efficient, and arguably deadlier. This wasn't nature's evolution doing the work, it was brains and practice. When people think Neanderthals, they imagine grumpy guys hunched by fires, one hand holding a club, the other a still wriggling dinner. But archaeological evidence tells a different story, where folks who could gut a reindeer in 5 minutes also knew when to stop and decorate a shell or bury their dead with flowers. Yep, Neanderthals had culture, and not the kind that grows on rotten meat. Starting with burial, many Neanderthal sites show intentional graves, often shallow pits, sometimes with burial goods or pollen traces suggesting they placed flowers with the dead. Whether it was spiritual, symbolic, or just he liked plants ancient style, we may never know. But the key is they cared, they mourned. They didn't just toss grandma behind a rock and call it a day. Then there's art. For years, people thought Neanderthals didn't do art. That was our thing. Then cave paintings in Spain popped up, made from red ochre over 64,000 years ago. Bad news that's before modern humans arrived in Europe. That awkward silence you hear anthropology professors quietly rethinking their confident lectures. Neanderthals also collected decorations, pierced shells, bird feathers, eagle talons stuff with no obvious practical use unless they were secretly inventing cosplay. Some probably wore them as jewelry, ritual items, or social badges. Bottom line, they didn't just survive, they lived with meaning. There's even a mysterious cave structure in France, deep underground, made from broken stalagmites arranged in a circle. No light, no clear use, no graffiti, just Neanderthals from 176,000 years ago doing spooky stuff in the dark, or maybe just being a little weird. Who knows? And don't forget language. They had a hyoid bone, crucial for speech, and genes linked to language processing. So, they might not have been writing poetry, but they sure weren't just grunting. Once, a Neanderthal looked. So, some folks said something meaningful maybe about meat, but still meaningful. Let's talk about what you're really curious about. Yep, Neanderthals and modern humans did some cross-species mingling. There's proof in the Bible and in our DNA. When the first Homo sapiens migrated to Europe and Asia around 60,000 years ago, they met the locals, the Neanderthals, and instead of acting like awkward distant cousins at a wedding, they basically had an evolutionary, hey, you awake moment? No sarcasm intended. We know this because it's literally written in our genes. Today, most non-Africans carry about 1 to 4% as Neanderthal DNA. Translation somewhere way back in your family tree. Some very distant great-great-great, you get the idea, had a slightly over-the-top Ice Age date. Was it love survival strategy, a prehistoric version of the gene pool's a little shallow? Scientists are still arguing. Some say it was consensual, others not so much. Hard to say exactly how that prehistoric romance looked, but it definitely left some genetic fingerprints sneaking around in us, like immune system quirks, skin color, and maybe even that weird hate for cilantro you have. Oh, and here's the kicker. It wasn't a one-time thing. Genetic evidence shows these mix-ups happened multiple times, in different places, over thousands of years. So it wasn't just some lost Homo sapiens crashing a dark cave party, and it wasn't one-way traffic. Neanderthal men and Homo sapiens women seemed to hang out more often, maybe because modern humans had better travel stories and cheekbones that scored higher on the evolutionary Tinder. We'll probably never know if Neanderthals were better at small talk or starting fires. But what's clear is this mix didn't create some super hybrid species. Neanderthals eventually vanished, but a bit of them still lives in us. Got a slightly flat nose that might be a Neanderthal gift. Obsessed with red meat and hate cardio. Also suspicious. Before you mock those bushy eyebrows or questionable Neanderthal fashion choices, maybe check your ancestry report statistically. You might be part Neanderthal. No offense, that's just science. Thanks to genome decoding and the tireless work of geneticists armed with fancy microscopes and leftover coffee. We now know most non-Africans carry about 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. So if you're watching this and you're great, well, you get the picture. Ancestors used to rock fur coats and didn't blink at blizzards. Congrats, you've got some Ice Age vibes in you. And this ancient legacy isn't just a fun fact. It shows up in a bunch of ways. For starters, Neanderthal genes affect skin color, hair texture, immune responses, and even pain sensitivity. So if you're a sunburn magnet, allergic in weird ways, or stub your toe and feel like you got shot, you might be running the Neanderthal edition of the human software. There's even evidence Neanderthal DNA influences sleep, fat metabolism, and reactions to some meds. Some studies suggest it might tweak mood regulation too. Yes, that means your winter grumpiness and mood swings could be genetic. But hey, not all news is sunshine and rainbows. Some Neanderthal gene variants link to type 2 diabetes, depression, and nicotine addiction. So while your ancient relatives might have helped you survive a mammoth ambush, they might also be why you can't resist midnight snacks and doom scrolling till 2 a.m. Also worth noting, folks from Africa didn't mix with Neanderthals after leaving Africa, so they mostly lack Neanderthal DNA, but they carry traces of other ancient humans, like Denisovans, meaning the human family tree is not a clean map, but a wild, tangled bush full of messy love stories. Neanderthals lived nearly 300,000 years, survived ice ages, saber-toothed beasts, and even themselves. They were Europe's first natives. Then around 40,000 years ago, poof gone, not wiped out by apocalypse or comet, just kind of turned off the lights like they missed the memo about the Holocene. So what happened? One theory says climate change, when the last ice age began warming up. Neanderthals struggled to adapt. Hunting grounds shifted. Big game got scarce. Even mammoths started acting dramatic, for a species built to dominate cold. Warming wasn't a summer vacation, it was a survival nightmare. Another theory competition with Homo sapiens. When modern humans arrived in Europe, they brought long-range weapons, a more varied diet, and that super annoying survival skill of thriving anywhere. They reproduced faster, roamed wider, and maybe talked more because in the human game, talking a lot is a big advantage. Neanderthals might have just been outnumbered. Their populations were smaller and more isolated, meaning less genetic diversity a big deal when every winter's a survival game and your neighbors are breeding like pros. But hey, this wasn't some violent takeover. There's no major evidence of genocide or war. If anything, Neanderthals and sapiens hung out for thousands of years, swapping DNA, sharing ideas, and probably trading some painfully awkward campfire jokes. They blended together slowly until pure Neanderthal communities vanished. The last Neanderthals might have held on in southern Iberia, like Gibraltar, flickering out like the last candles. Archaeology goes quiet, no new tools, no new graves, so just silence. But hey, that's not failure, it's history leaving a permanent mark. Neanderthals didn't vanish with a bang. Their influence lingers not in monuments or scrolls, but in DNA, bones, blood. They weren't erased, they were absorbed. For most of modern history, Neanderthals got a raw deal not biologically, but image-wise. They were the original bad news story when the first Neanderthal fossils popped up in the 19th century. Scientists freaked out trying to label them. Skull looked human, but with massive brows and chunky limbs, like someone put a regular guy through a muscle-building filter. Victorian scientists, who were oh so Victorian, quickly slapped on labels like crude, primitive, and probably terrible at dinner parties. And just like that, the legend of the hunched, grumbling cave guy was born part monster, part hillbilly uncle. The name Neanderthal didn't help either. Sounds like some troll living under a bridge throwing stones at goats. Early depictions didn't flatter them either. One famous painting shows a Neanderthal standing like a gorilla, staring blankly. No neck spoiler alert. It was actually an old guy with arthritis. It's like judging all humans based on your cranky great-great-grandpa with a bad back. That image stuck. Comics, movies, textbooks reinforced it, a dumb brute with a club, shuffling suspiciously. Meanwhile, the truth that Neanderthals buried their dead, made art, crafted tools, maybe even rocked, some bling was ignored in favor of grunts and loincloths. Why do we do this? Probably because it makes us feel superior. Humans love stories where they're the chosen, smartest ones. Turning Neanderthals into a failed prototype keeps that fairy tale alive. It also helps us deny those annoying shared genes. Yeah, we're related, but we're better. Right. Only recently has the myth started to crumble with new archaeological finds. We had to admit Neanderthals were more like us than different. They weren't mistakes. They were a parallel success, a different strategy. Same battle. Now, switch gears to Japan's Heian period, torn by war, where battlefields weren't exactly women's turf. But that's where Tomo Gozen steps in. Picture a sea of armored warriors clashing steel in dusty chaos. And right in the middle, one standout figure, not because she's lost, but because she's better, braver, and deadlier than most around her. Tomoe Gozen wasn't some camp follower or noble princess playing at war. She was a trained warrior, a musha from Echigo province, raised riding horses, shooting bows mid-gallop, and swinging katana with such ferocity she'd make guys twice her size bleed and hit the dirt. Her loyalty was to Minamoto, no Yoshinaka, a top general of the Minamoto faction. But don't get it twisted. Tomoe wasn't just his bodyguard or eye candy. She was a commander, an equal, and a force to be reckoned with. Contemporary records describe her as stunningly beautiful, with pale skin, long hair, and a charming face. But the compliments didn't stop at looks. She was known for strength, deadly archery, and unmatched sword skills. And no, this isn't poetic court gossip, it's battlefield fact. She could slice through enemy ranks, behead foes mid-gallop, and keep riding without missing a beat. Tomoe Gozen was a human storm, and her presence wasn't a fluke. Japan was ripped apart by the Genpei War, a civil war between Minamoto and Taira clans fighting for the emperor's throne. Feudal laws were being rewritten, samurai were rising, and in that chaos, Tomoe carved out a space no woman dared touch before on the front lines. She didn't just fight, she led troops, won battles, and brought back enemy heads like any warrior, proving their worth. Most importantly, she shattered the rigid mold of what a 12th century Japanese woman was supposed to be. Tomoe Gozen wasn't a one-off. She was a revelation, a warning, and a legend in the making. Before tasting battle, she had to learn how to survive in a world that wasn't built for women. Feudal Japan was all about hierarchy, honor, and strict boundaries, especially for women. Samurai daughters were expected to be polite, loyal, and quiet. But Tomo's life was anything but. Totally different story. We're not exactly sure when she was born, but chances are she popped out into a small samurai family near the end of the Heian period. Some records say she might have grown up in Minamoto no Yoshinaka's household. Whether she was a concubine, foster sister, or just a trusted sidekick is still up for debate. What's not up for debate? Her skills. Those didn't come easy. She had to grind hard, while the boys got handed swords and taught the Bushido code. Tomoe had to prove over and over she could do everything they could and then some. Her training brutal, no doubt. Swordsmanship isn't just about brute force, it's timing, control, and reading your opponent's mind. She drilled kenjutsu for sword fighting and kyudo for archery, learned to battle in heavy armor, and tamed war horses at full gallop on rare, chill days. She'd practice naginata, the curved blade spear traditional for female warriors. But don't get it twisted. This wasn't some fancy ritual, it was prep for real violence. Tomo's fighting style was both elegant and deadly. And she didn't just keep up with the men, she usually outclassed them. This phase of her life before the battles, before the legends was lonely, most women didn't carry swords, most weren't invited to strategy meetings, most weren't expected to survive the battlefield, but Tomo made the world bend to her will. Every skill she learned had to be twice as sharp, twice as precise, and twice as lethal as her male counterparts, because if she slipped up, nobody called it a warrior's mistake. Nope. They called it a woman's weakness. So before Tomo Gozen could carve her name into history, she had to carve out her place in the samurai world, one sword stroke, one day at a time, all in silence and shadows. She didn't get invited, she created her own opportunities. By the time Tomo Gozen grew up, Japan was teetering on collapse. The Genpei War, a bloody civil war between the Taira and Minamoto clans, exploded in 1180. This wasn't just army versus army, it was a total shakeup of the country's power structure. Emperors were pawns, and the warrior class was about to rewrite history. And Tomoe, she was right, smack in the middle of that storm. Her lord, and maybe her lover, Minamoto no Yoshinaka, was a distant cousin of the more famous Minamoto no Yoritomo. But unlike Yoritomo, Yoshinaka wasn't content to hang in the shadows. He wanted control of Kyoto, the Minamoto clan, and the whole country. When war broke out, he didn't hesitate. He rallied his own army in the northern provinces and started a campaign south. Tomo Gozen right by his side. She wasn't some decorative warrior to show off at court. Tomo led troops into battle. She made tactical calls, and when things got bloody, she was front and center, sword drawn, giving orders no man dared question. She embodied Yoshinaka's boldness, his readiness to smash traditions and win at any cost. The Genpei War was brutal. Battles raged on rivers, in forests, across mountains. Arrows fell like monsoon rain, and hand-to-hand combat stained the red earth with blood. One of Tomo's most famous wins was the Battle of Yokotagahara, where she supposedly led a charge that wiped out enemy forces. Chronicles say she beheaded many samurai and brought the heads back as trophies, not just for bragging rights, but as proof. Every kill was a bill, every head a message. But war wasn't just glory, it was loyalty and betrayal as Yoshinaka grew stronger. Tensions with Yoritomo, who saw his cousin's ambition as a threat, escalated. The Minamoto clan, already divided by egos and pride, started turning inward, even though the Taira were still officially the enemy. Yoshinaka now had to watch his back. Tomoe, fiercely loyal, stayed right beside him, but no matter how sharp her sword was, it couldn't slice through the tangled mess of politics. And as the war escalated, so did the pressure not just on Yoshinaka's power, but on Tomoe's place in history. As the Genpei War dragged on, Yoshinaka's ambitions outpaced even his allies. In 1183, after a string of brilliant military victories, he did what many thought impossible, drove the Taira out of Kyoto and seized control of the court. At that moment, he was the most powerful man in Japan, and Tomoe Gozen was always by his side, victorious, loyal, and blood-soaked, but power's a double-edged sword. Yoshinaka dreamed of restoring the emperor's authority, but the emperor and nobles quickly realized he was just as uncontrollable as the war he waged. He ravaged the city, enraging Kyoto's elite, and started making moves that even the Minamoto feared. Worst of all, he tried to control Emperor Go-Shirakawa himself, a power grab so bold it was political suicide. Minamoto no Yoritomo, now the real boss of the Minamoto clan, fired back hard. He branded Yoshinaka a traitor and sent 2 loyal generals, Minamoto no Noriyori and the legendary Minamoto no Yoshitsune, to take him down. The Minamoto Civil War kicked off, and Tomoe Gozen was no longer fighting the Taira. It was her own clan she faced. What came next was a fast and tragic downfall. Yoshinaka, once the gutsy wild card, found himself outplayed and outnumbered. He retreated from Kyoto, leaving only a handful of loyal folks, including Tomoe, stood their ground one last time at the Awazu battle in early 1184. This was their last breath, not for glory, but for honor. When the enemy closed in, Tomoe fought like a demon unleashed. Chronicles say she charged into the enemy ranks, found the toughest warrior she could, and sliced his head off before galloping back through the wreckage. This wasn't just skill, it was a statement. Even in defeat, she refused to be erased, but Yoshinaka knew it was over. Legend has it, he begged to leave the battlefield, not because he doubted her courage, but because dying beside a woman would be a disgrace for a samurai general. A painful paradox, his fiercest warrior was sidelined to protect his legacy. Did she obey? Some sources say yes, others claim she vanished in the fight and was never seen again. Either way, Yoshinaka's fall marked the end of an era and the birth of a legend. Snow blanketed the battlefield. It was February 1184, and the Awazu plain was eerily silent, too quiet for the bloody storm about to erupt. Minamoto no Yoshinaka stood there with just a few dozen survivors, once the conqueror of Kyoto, now a fugitive in his own clan. His final stand had come, and Gozen, always by his side, had no intention of letting him die alone. The victory gate was nearly closed. Hundreds of enemy warriors, led by Yoshitsune and Noriyori, swarmed in, gleaming armor, horses kicking up frozen dirt, and in the biting cold wind, Tomoe Gozen adjusted her helmet, drew her sword, and charged into legend. According to the 14th century Heike Monogatari, Tomoe didn't back down. She stormed in like a hurricane, hunting the strongest opponent she could find, Hatakeyama Shigetada, no less famous a warrior, though driven by anger, desperation, or sheer refusal to die quietly. Tomoe skipped the formalities. She locked blades, knocked him down, and smoothly beheaded him, her final trophy. This wasn't just a show. It was samurai spirit in action, dying beautifully, fighting to the last breath, proving yourself against impossible odds. For Tomoe, that was her defining moment through the centuries. This single act, retold and reenacted endlessly, became her battle cry, echoing through time. Meanwhile, Yoshinaka's horse got stuck in a rice paddy, and a volley of arrows took him down. His most loyal friend, Imai Kanehira, chose a dramatic suicide, placing his sword in his mouth and leaping from his horse to the ground. The innermost circle of the warlord was wiped out. As for Tomoe, the sources diverge here. One version says Yoshinaka ordered her to flee before he died, fearing the shame of dying beside a woman. Another says she refused, fought her way out, and vanished into the mountains. Some say she was captured, forced to marry an enemy general, then later became a nun. No confirmed conclusion exists. But one thing's clear: her last recorded act wasn't surrender, it was defiance. Tomoe Gozen didn't just disappear, she ascended into legend, carried on the back of a perfect, furious final charge after the bloody snows of Owazu. Tomoe Gozen vanished from the records as if she rode straight off the battlefield and into myth. No historian can say for sure what happened to her, and maybe that's exactly how it should be. Warriors like Tomo weren't meant to survive. They were supposed to die with their lord, sword, and honor intact. But Tomoe, she might have chosen a much more rebellious path to live on. Heike Monogatari, the main source on her life, spins many conflicting tales. Some say she was captured and forced to marry one of Yoritomo's generals, Wada Yoshimori. She bore his child. Then after his death, she became a nun, retreating from the world of steel and politics. Another story claims she cut off her warrior's long hair, changed her name, and vanished into the mountain temples of Nagano, never to be seen again. Yet another version says she wandered the countryside like a ronin and aimless mercenary with no allegiance, running personal revenge errands or border skirmishes before falling silent forever. Centuries passed without a trace, the truth buried under layers of legend. Scrolls and storytelling may never surface, but Tomo's disappearance only made her stronger. By stepping out of history, she became immortal, no longer boxed into one ending, one role, or one version of the woman. Instead, she became the symbol of all possibilities. Her story only gets more mysterious. This was also when Japan itself transformed in her absence. The rise of the Kamakura shogunate under Minamoto no Yoritomo kicked off an era of hardcore patriarchy. Shoving women further into the background, female warriors didn't vanish completely, but they were increasingly forgotten, fictionalized, or erased. Yet Tomo survived not in dusty official scrolls, maybe, but in the stories mothers whispered to daughters, in hushed tales around soldiers' campfires. She became the ghost, haunting the samurai archetype, the woman who fought like 10 men but refused to bow to anyone. Over time, poets, playwrights, and artists kept resurrecting her, sometimes as a tragic lover, sometimes as a vengeful demon, or the last true samurai warrior, but always as a figure who defied every expectation and left a mysterious mark. Tomoe Gozen didn't just disappear, she transformed, and the silence she left behind echoes louder than any battlefield screams. Across centuries, the woman once feared on the front lines became something else entirely, a legend shaped by poets, monks, and playwrights in an era when women were expected to be invisible. Tomoe Gozen became unforgettable. The Heike Monogatari, a semi-historical war epic compiled in the 13th century, was the first to carve her into cultural memory. But this wasn't just history, it was theater. Blind monks called Biwa Hoshi wandered village to village, singing the Genpei war stories with their biwa lutes through their voices. Tomoe was reborn, not just as a warrior, but as a tragic heroine. Later versions pumped her up even more in no and kabuki plays. Tomoe became a recurring character, her beauty exaggerated, her loyalty dramatized, every battle perfected down to the last detail. She was linked to doomed romances, tearful goodbyes, and moral lessons about honor and duty. The audience didn't just watch her fight, they cried for her, admired her, feared, and loved her all at once. But this romanticizing came at a cost. The real woman, the one who beheaded enemies and led cavalry charges, slowly got watered down over time. Her armor swapped for a soft kimono, swordplay turned into a metaphor for feminine endurance. She became more palatable, noble, and tamed, yet her image refused to die. Edo period artists painted her charging into battle, calm-faced, sword-ready. Samurai manuals listed her among top martial role models. Sword schools named techniques after her, even as the tale became myth. It kept the sharp edge of the battlefield in modern Japan. Tomoe Gozen is often mentioned alongside legendary warriors Musashi, Benkei, Yoshitsune, but unlike them, she carries the extra weight of challenging gender norms. She wasn't just an exception, she was a challenge to the rules. Through every era, women looked to Tomo as proof they belonged wherever they chose, even smack dab in the middle of a battlefield. The further from fact, the closer to icon she got a woman who shouldn't exist, but did. An undefeatable warrior who still endures. And a story that refuses to end. Tomoe Gozen's sword might have been sheathed over 800 years ago, but her shadow remains etched not just in legend, but in the cultural psyche of Japan and the world. Across generations, she became more than a character in the Genpei War. She's a symbol of resistance, personality, and the power to break every mold for women who refuse to follow the script. In the Edo period, when samurai culture got formalized and ritualized into strict rules, Tomoe's image was both inspiration and warning. Some saw her as the ultimate loyalty personified, a warrior serving her lord to the bitter end, but many, especially male intellectuals, saw her as a dangerous anomaly, proof that when women step outside their assigned roles, chaos follows. Yet even those scared of her couldn't erase her. By the late 19th century, Meiji Restoration, when Japan was racing to modernize and reshape national identity, Tomoe popped up again in textbooks and media, this time as a patriotic heroine. She appeared in children's books, school plays, and nationalist art, usually alongside male samurai legends. The image got cleaned up, sure, but the truth remained: a female warrior had entered official history in the 20th and 21st centuries. Tomoe's legacy kept evolving. She became a favorite muse for manga artists, game developers, feminist scholars, and filmmakers. In a media world full of bland characters, Tomoe stood out a woman whose legend wasn't about romance, but about fighting. She wasn't the abandoned lover, she was the sword-wielding frontline warrior. Modern takes on Tomo reflect shifting attitudes. Some see her as a feminist icon, others as a tragic figure unfinished by fate, and some as a battlefield-obsessed warrior spirit. Whatever the view, she's always strong, complex, and forever just out of full understanding, even in politics and education. Tomoe Gozen became a symbol of rebellion. Schools are named after her, dojos draw inspiration from her. She's on stamps, posters, and even anime plots. Her name pops up whenever someone wants to prove the warrior spirit can live on in any form. She fought just one battle, but her presence keeps inspiring everyone fighting for identity, justice, and place. Tomoe Gozen never asked to be remembered. No memoirs, no letters, no poetic reflections. She left behind only what mattered most to a warrior of her time, a legacy forged in blood, loyalty, and the fire of war. Because of that, she achieved what few in history do: immortality without begging for it. Unlike many women of her era, Tomoe isn't remembered for fitting social norms. She's remembered for breaking them. Every time she swung her sword on a battlefield full of sneering men, she rewrote the rules of feudal Japan, and even as she vanished into darkness, That absence only made her story echo louder. In a culture where silence often defined a woman's worth, Tomoe's silence after Wazuma became its own roar. The lack of concrete details about her fate allowed generations of artists, scholars, and free spirits to fill the gaps with meaning. She became the embodiment of possibility, proof you can defy the system and still become a legend. Her name lives on, not just in literature and pop culture, but also in the spirit of every woman refusing to be invisible, every athlete pushing past limits, every leader called reckless, every warrior who stands without waiting for permission. Tomoe Gozen isn't just history, she's rebellion wrapped in silence. Today, her statues stand in Nagano and across Japan. Schoolgirls learn about her in history class. Cosplayers dress as her at anime conventions. Martial artists whisper her name while training with Naginata. She even shows up in games and international series, reminding global audiences everywhere. So, the idea of a female warrior isn't just some bedtime story, it's history. And maybe her greatest power is that we still don't fully get her. Was she a concubine turned general, an adopted kid who learned the art of war, or a lone Ronin who vanished into the mountains and never looked back? We might never uncover the full truth. But that's the point. Tomoe Gozen isn't just one story. She's a whole series of stories, untethered by records, untouched by time. She forever rides her sword, charging into the legend she made herself. Before, satellites lit up the sky and compasses pointed north. Ancient sailors stared out at the endless horizon, daring to ask, what's out there? They weren't reckless thrill seekers. They were engineers, navigators, dreamers, just with stars above and wind in their sails. They charted the first sea routes connecting the world. Humanity's love affair with the ocean started tens of thousands of years ago. Some of the earliest evidence for water travel dates back over 40,000 years, way before the agricultural revolution. Even then, prehistoric folks built rafts to reach far-off islands like Australia, crossing hundreds of miles of open ocean. These weren't lucky accidents. These were planned voyages, crafted with solid knowledge of tides, winds, and star patterns. By 3000 BCE, maritime technology was booming. Cultures in Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and along the Nile used boats for trade and fishing, but real seafaring kicked off when some civilizations dared to brave the open ocean. These early sailors faced brutal challenges: no maps, no written directions, and often zero guarantee they'd make it back. Yet they went anyway, driven by need, curiosity, and the will to survive. They read waves like open books, spotted clouds gathering over islands, tracked birds flying on schedule, and watched how stars spun around the sky. The night sky, in particular, became their ultimate tool. For example, in the northern hemisphere, the North Star was their fixed point for navigation. Down south, sailors stared at the Southern Cross. These sea wanderers learned to feel the quiet push of water beneath their hulls. They listened to the wind's whisper in the sails. Most impressively, they passed this knowledge down orally, through songs, stories, and sacred traditions for generations. Their tools weren't compasses or sextants. It was memory, observation, and intuition. This wasn't just survival. It was science before science had a name, a blend of nature and culture understanding the world. And when they set off into unknown seas, these ancient sailors didn't just map oceans. They laid the groundwork for global trade, migration, and the first connections between civilizations that hadn't even heard of each other, long before Athens or the Roman Empire hit their peak. Crete was home to the most sophisticated maritime civilization the ancient world ever saw, the Minoans, flourishing roughly between 2000 and 1450 BCE. The Minoans weren't just islanders, they were the architects of the sea, turning oceans into superhighways of culture, commerce, and power. Their capital, Knossos, was a sprawling palace complex decorated with vibrant frescoes of dolphins, ships, and sea creatures. These weren't just pretty pictures, they were declarations. The Minoans lived and breathed the sea. Their economy thrived on maritime trade, and their influence spread across the Aegean, reaching Egypt, the Levant, and beyond. Unlike the later Greek navies built for war, Minoan ships were designed for speed and stability, perfect for trade and diplomacy missions. Their boats, often adorned with birds or bulls, used square sails and rowers to navigate the calm but tricky Mediterranean waters. These vessels carried everything from olive oil and wine to pottery and bronze, but more than goods. The Minoans carried ideas, art, religion, and technology, sending waves of culture rippling across the Aegean. So how did they navigate? Although no Minoan sea maps survive, archaeologists believe they used a combo of star navigation and visual cues, coastal headlands, watercolor, bird flight paths. The fact they always returned from long voyages shows they deeply understood monsoons and ocean rhythms long before anyone wrote it down. An amazing sign of Minoan maritime skill is their role in developing the Greek alphabet through contact with Eastern Mediterranean cultures like the Phoenicians. The Minoans paved the way for one of history's most influential writing systems. Their ships weren't just boats, they were floating cultural empires, but like many sea powers before and after, their downfall probably came from the very ocean they ruled. Around 1450 BCE, a volcanic eruption on nearby Thera, today's Santorini, likely triggered tsunamis and ash clouds that destroyed Minoan ports and shook their dominance, whether by nature or war. Their ships finally vanished from the waves, but the Minoans left more than ruins. They left a legacy of ruling not by land, but by sea. If the Minoans were the artists of the sea, then the Phoenicians were the ocean's tireless business sharks. From around 1500 to 300 BC, Phoenicia, a loose alliance of city-states like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos ruled the eastern Mediterranean, not with armies, but with fleets. Their legacy wasn't about empires or wars. It was navigation, trade, and spreading culture across the known world. No grand kingdom or flashy capital here, just boats, lots of boats, sleek, fast, agile ships built for long-haul trade, rocking both square sails and oars. Their boats hugged coastlines or cut across open waters, carrying glass, cedar wood, purple dye, and the most valuable cargo of all ideas. They were the middlemen of the ancient world, linking Egypt to Anatolia, Greece to Mesopotamia, and North Africa to the western Mediterranean. They built coastal outposts and colonies, the most famous being Carthage in North Africa, which later gave Rome a headache. Each colony was a cog in a sprawling maritime network, with the mother cities in the east cashing in on trans-Mediterranean trade. But how did they cover such crazy distances without compasses or sextants like the Minoans before them? The Phoenicians navigated by the stars, especially the North Star. They also understood wind patterns, coastal landmarks, and ocean currents. Many scholars believe they developed one of the earliest celestial navigation systems in the West. But their biggest contribution wasn't what they carried, it was what they invented: the alphabet, the Phoenician script. Around 1050 BC was revolutionary, a mere 22 characters, representing sounds, not whole words or syllables. This alphabet went on to inspire Greek, so Latin, Hebrew, and Arabic scripts, thanks to this linguistic breakthrough and their stubborn sea legs. The Phoenicians didn't just trade goods, they connected worlds. They turned the ocean from a barrier into a bridge of cultures, languages, and economies, not by conquering hearts and minds, but by sailing from island to island. The Mediterranean wasn't just their highway, it was their identity. While the Mediterranean buzzed with Phoenician merchants and Greek warships halfway around the globe, a totally different seafaring story was unfolding with outriggers, catamarans, and stars charted over the biggest ocean on Earth. Enter the Austronesian sailors, who didn't just row boats, they conquered half the planet's surface without metal tools, maps, or writing, starting from what's now Taiwan around 3000 BC. The Austronesians steadily pushed south and east, hopping islands at a mind-boggling pace. By 1500 BC, they reached the Philippines, that's Indonesia, and the edges of New Guinea. By 1000 BC, they had settled Micronesia and Melanesia, and by the 1st century AD, they'd stretched all the way west to Madagascar and east to Easter Island, a migration arc over 10,000 miles long. Their boats were engineering marvels. Austronesians developed outriggers for balance, then double-hulled canoes that could carry entire families, livestock, and cargo across thousands of miles of open ocean. They used crab claw sails to catch the wind and paddles for precision near islands. But what really set them apart was their killer navigation skills. They used the sun, moon, planets, and over 200 stars as their compasses, and that was just the start. Austronesian sailors, especially the famous Polynesian navigators, read the ocean like a living map. They detected subtle wave changes caused by distant islands reflecting big swells. They followed seabird flight paths, studied cloud formations, and even tasted seawater to sense shifts in salinity near shore. This wasn't some gut feeling. It was sophisticated science passed down through songs and memory tricks. Their migration wasn't random discovery. It was deliberate and repeatable. Lapita pottery, a cultural hallmark, marks their path across the Pacific, showing just how tightly connected their world was. They didn't just island hop, they built civilizations, spreading agriculture, language, and tech wherever they landed. And in many ways, they're still doing it. Modern genetics, linguistics, and archaeology keep revealing the sophistication and scale of Austronesian navigation. These sailors didn't just cross oceans, they connected the planet's farthest corners, long before European explorers set sail. The Pacific Ocean was no empty void, it was a roadmap. Now, when most people think of ancient Egypt, they picture towering pyramids and desert tombs, not boats. But the Egyptians weren't strangers to water. The Nile was their lifeline, highway, and their first navigation school. What often gets overlooked is how far they pushed maritime reach beyond the riverbanks, exploring the Red Sea and maybe even farther. Egypt's mastery of the Nile started early, as far back as 3000 BC. They built those big wooden boats by lashing planks together with ropes and sealing them with pine resin. These boats, powered by both sails and oars, were crucial for hauling goods, soldiers, and grain across the wide stretches of the river. But the Nile was just the warm-up act. By the time Pharaoh Hatshepsut rolled around in the 15th century BCE, Egypt was sending out sea expeditions from ports along the Red Sea. Her famous voyage to the mysterious land of Punt, which might be modern-day Somalia, Eritrea, or southern Arabia, was a landmark in ancient maritime history. The reliefs in her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari show big cargo ships loaded with exotic animals, incense, trees, and gold, all proudly returning from a successful sea trip. These weren't accidental drifts. These were carefully planned missions, timed with monsoons, currents, and seasons. Egyptian sailors definitely hugged the coastline, used constellations for navigation, and relied on sea scouts, probably even hiring local Red Sea experts for the tricky bits. Some theories even hint at contact between Egypt and the Indus Valley through indirect sea trade, especially during the peak trade frenzy between Mesopotamia, India, and Egypt. Direct proof is thin, but things like ivory, lapis lazuli, and spices suggest a vast Indian Ocean trade network Egypt might have been part of. These ships were the tech marvels of their day, made from cedar wood, mostly imported from Lebanon. Egyptian sea vessels had curved hulls and huge square sails. They could haul heavy cargo and brave the Red Sea's rough waves. Egypt never became the naval power the Phoenicians were, but they left an important legacy. They were among the first to treat sea voyages as royal, sacred, and strategic affairs. Their sea trips were extensions of empire, diplomacy, and divine authority on land. Sure, they built pyramids, but on the water, they lit the spark of ambition. Between the dusty fields of modern Pakistan and northwest India lay the world's oldest urban civilization, the Harappans, or the Indus Valley Civilization, flourishing from 2600 to 1900 BCE. They built cities with modern sewage systems, standardized bricks, and impressively planned layouts. But beneath that archaeological sparkle lies a lesser-known yet crucial fact: the Harappans were sea traders. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, they left no deciphered writing, no grand naval reliefs, no epic sea sagas. Yet their maritime prowess quietly whispers through scattered archaeological clues. Excavations at Lothal, a major Harappan port in Gujarat, revealed what many believe is one of the world's oldest docks, 218 meters long, complete with floodgates and canals. It connected to an ancient river flowing into the Arabian Sea, proving Harappan engineers thought beyond land and looked to the sea. Artifacts tell the rest: Harappan seals and goods beads. Ivory, pottery show up in Mesopotamia, especially in Sumerian cities like Lagash. Sumerian texts mention a faraway land called Meluha, likely the Indus region, where ships brought strange goods. In return, Harappans got silver, tin, and lapis lazuli, hinting at a complex trade network stretching from the Persian Gulf to almost all of the Near East. But how did they fish? Although no intact Harappan ships survive, miniatures, terracotta boats, and carvings show they used flat-bottomed riverboats and sea vessels. They probably rode seasonal monsoon winds, later exploited by Arab and Indian traders crossing the Indian Ocean. Harappan sailors surely stuck close to coasts, stopping at natural harbors and river mouths, navigating by stars and currents, unlike their war-happy contemporaries. The Harappans were seriously peaceful. Their cities show almost no signs of war or fortifications. This makes their sea connections even more fascinating. They didn't invade neighbors' shores. They linked them through trade and diplomacy. Then, Around 1900 BCE, their civilization began to fade. Rivers changed course, trade shrank, cities were abandoned. Their writing went silent too, leaving a quiet question: how far did their ships really sail, though their voices vanished? Traces on the water remain etched in harbors, seals, and silent stones for the ancient Greeks. The sea wasn't just a route, it was destiny, nestled between the Aegean, Ionian, and Mediterranean seas. Greek civilization rose in a world where sailing was as crucial as farming, from Homer's epics to Athens' naval peak. The Greeks turned sea culture into an art, a science, and a strategy. The earliest tales, Odysseus battling sea monsters and Jason chasing the Golden Fleece, weren't just myths. They reflected a people deeply tied to the ocean. Greek city-states like Athens, Corinth, Rhodes, they didn't just rely on the sea for trade. It was their whole identity. Their gods ruled the waves. Their heroes set sail, and their empire floated on wooden ships, fueled by ambition. By the 8th century BC, Greek settlers were all over the Mediterranean, founding cities from Sicily to the Black Sea. These colonies weren't military bases. They were trade hubs, cultural satellites, and key ports in a sprawling economic web. Goods flowed both ways: olive oil, wine, pottery from Greece, grains, metals, and slaves from faraway lands to navigate. Greek sailors leaned on coastal horizons. Stars, especially the rising and setting of certain constellations, and seafaring wisdom passed down like family gossip. Their ships evolved from simple merchant boats into powerful warships, thus like the trireme, a three-tiered beast with up to 170 rowers and a bronze ram to poke enemy ships. The trireme wasn't just a boat, it was Athens' living, breathing symbol of democracy and muscle. By the 5th century BC, Athens boasted the deadliest fleet in the ancient world, the Delian League. At first, a defensive alliance against Persia, morphed into an Athenian naval empire. Their fleet controlled sea lanes, taxed allies, and ensured resources flowed back to Athens, fueling a golden age of philosophy, architecture, and theater. But power has its downsides. The Peloponnesian War with Sparta turned Athens' naval obsession against them. Naval defeats, blockades, and internal chaos dragged Athens down. Still, their legacy stuck. Greek breakthroughs in mapping, celestial navigation, and shipbuilding laid the groundwork for the Romans and later Europe's mastery of the sea. The Greeks saw the ocean as a stage for glory, knowledge, and tragedy, a vibe that echoes in Western thought to this day. Now, Rome started out as just a bunch of farmers and shepherds stuck inland, slow to embrace the sea, but once they did, they didn't just join the naval powers club, they crushed it. The Mediterranean, once a messy tangle of rival fleets and scattered colonies, became what the Romans proudly called Mare Nostrum, our sea. Rome wasn't always a sea superpower. The Etruscans and Greeks controlled Italy's coasts, while Carthage, not founded by the Phoenicians, ruled the western Mediterranean with the region's strongest fleet. But everything flipped during the Punic Wars, facing Carthage's naval dominance. The Romans went all in. They took apart a captured Carthaginian warship to build an exact copy in a lightning-fast industrial binge. They churned out a fleet, hundreds of ships in just months. But then they added something only Romans could dream up: the Corvus, a boarding bridge that turned sea battles into hand-to-hand combat. Genius, right? This move played to Roman infantry's strengths, letting soldiers storm enemy ships like they were storming a fortress. Winning the Punic Wars didn't just crown Rome's sea boss, it gave them control over Sicily, Sardinia, Spain, and eventually the entire Mediterranean coastline. Roman ships, military and merchant alike, patrolled sea routes carrying grain, troops, and exotic goods from Egypt, Gaul, Syria, and beyond. Ports like Ostia and Alexandria buzzed non-stop, turning the Mediterranean into a Roman superhighway, the Pax Romana. 2 centuries of relative peace owed a big chunk of its chill vibe to this maritime grip. The sea, once a pirate playground and clash zone for empires, became a stable trade zone. Grain flowed to the capital, luxuries, silk, spices, pearls poured in from India and China via sea routes stretching to the Red Sea and Persian Gulf. Roman sailors combined dead reckoning, coastal navigation, and stargazing aided by detailed sea logs called periploi. No compass, no problem. They knew the winds and currents by heart, especially the Aegean breeze that made eastbound trips more predictable. Rome didn't just conquer on land. They survived because of the sea. The navy protected trade, enforced empire will, and kept communication lines open across huge distances with their fleet. Romans did what no culture before them managed, turning a chaotic sea into a controlled empire, long before modern maps, compasses, or diesel engines. The ancient world connected through an invisible web of sea routes, not drawn in ink, but traced by wind, memory, and stars, from reed boats on the Nile to double-hulled canoes of the Pacific. These early maritime cultures didn't just explore the ocean, they defined it. Their legacy lingers in every port, trade route, and ship cutting through waves today. Knowledge passed down from the Minoans, Phoenicians, Arawaks, Egyptians, and many others became the blueprint for later navigation. They knew how to read the sky like a map, follow Earth's rhythms, and build ships tough enough to last months at sea, all without metal hulls or paper charts. These discoveries weren't one-offs. They piled up over time. Each maritime civilization learned from their predecessors or neighbors, adding a new needle to the global navigation tapestry. The Phoenician alphabet helped record complex sea trade. Arawak navigation stayed alive through oral tradition, inspiring a 20th century revival of tool-free sailing. Greeks watching stars and winds laid the foundation of ancient geography. Roman engineering gave us harbors and lighthouses, designs still influencing us today. But more important than all that were the connections. Sea routes let ideas travel faster than armies. Religion, tech, crops, languages, and even diseases hitched rides on those waves. Ancient maritime culture didn't just move goods, they moved civilization itself. Without them, the Silk Road might have stopped at the shore. Without them, empires might never have risen, and strangers could have stayed strangers forever. Yet despite their huge feats, many early sailors remain nameless. Their stories barely got written down. Their ships rotted and vanished. What's left are fragments, shards of pottery in sunken cargo holds, port structures buried under modern concrete, star charts carved on bone or bark, but their influence keeps spreading like a tidal wave. Every container ship through the Suez Canal, every satellite-tracked shipment across the Pacific, every naval patrol in the Mediterranean owes a little to those brave souls chasing horizons. They might be ancient, but they were anything but primitive. They were humanity's original pathfinders. In the ancient world, being born royal was both a blessing and a curse. The moment a baby was born in the palace, they stopped being just a kid. They became a symbol, a political tool, and the empire's future. Their education didn't start in a classroom. It began in the nursery, amid whispers about lineage, legacy, and lurking dangers, unlike regular kids who learned survival by hard work. Noble offspring were prepped to lead from day one. Every move, every word was scrutinized, shaped, and molded. Their lives were a performance, a rehearsal for a throne they might never actually sit on. They didn't learn to read for fun, they learned to read treaties. They didn't learn to speak to express feelings, they learned to command, interpret laws, and deliver carefully crafted flattery to foreign envoys. What they studied varied by place and dynasty, but the goal was the same: control, charm, and maintain power. A Babylonian prince might learn cuneiform from scribes, while an Egyptian heir would be introduced to hieroglyphs by priests, along with rituals and sacred myths. In Greece, philosophy was mandatory. In Persia, military discipline ruled. In China, Confucianism dominated the curriculum. Their toys were political miniature weapons, board games simulating strategy, and symbolic animals reflecting the roles they were expected to master. Teachers weren't just tutors, they were carefully chosen court stewards, loyal, elite, and often sacrificial. If the royal kid failed, the teacher paid the price, and that price was always steep. A poorly educated heir was a national liability. A weak or unprepared child could become a pawn for enemies or ambitious relatives. Education back then wasn't about personal growth. It was about regime survival. But as harsh as it was, royal education could also be dazzling. These kids got early exposure to astronomy, medicine, foreign languages, ethics, and the arts long before most of the world. Some grew up to be polymaths, politicians, generals, and scholars raised not just to rule, but to outwit everyone in the room. Being born a prince or a princess in the ancient world wasn't just luck, it was a lifelong competition. Education was the first battlefield. Behind every powerful ancient king was usually a much less famous figure, the teacher. They weren't just glorified babysitters, they were philosophers, priests, generals, and political operatives. Their job was to shape the child into not just an adult, but a ruler, diplomat, and sometimes a god. Few teacher-student relationships echo through history like Aristotle and Alexander the Great, handpicked by Philip of Macedon. Aristotle's job was to turn a hot-headed prince into more than just a warrior. He schooled him in ethics, rhetoric, zoology, geography, and philosophy, feeding a hunger for knowledge that never quit. When Alexander later conquered the known world, he carried copies of Homer and philosophical works like sacred weapons. Aristotle didn't just teach facts, he built the inner world of a future conqueror. But Aristotle wasn't unique. In the Roman Empire, Seneca, the Stoic philosopher and politician, got the task of educating young Nero. He tried to shape the boy with virtue, reason, and self-control. Spoiler alert: history remembers Nero as one of Rome's most infamous tyrants. Seneca isn't entirely to blame, but it shows even the best teachers can't always tame dark instincts or court politics. In Persia, royal tutors were often military men chosen for loyalty and discipline. Achaemenid princes learned hunting, horseback riding, and combat from as young as 7, while also getting moral lessons on honesty and fairness, all under the strict watch of elite advisors. Their education was practical, harsh, and deeply political. In ancient China, Confucian scholars held the power to shape princes, instilling ideals of filial piety, hierarchy, and ritual. But woe to the tutor who slipped up. One wrong word could mean exile or execution if it clashed with imperial doctrine. Being a royal tutor meant living in the shadows, making history through others' mouths and hands. They had to be wise yet invisible, commanding yet respectful, walking a tightrope too close and you're envied, fail and you're out, succeed and your name only survives if your pupil makes history, while peasant kids learned from life. Noble children in ancient times studied systems built behind palace walls, private armies, temple libraries, and sometimes secret schools hoarding knowledge like gold. And royal education wasn't just about power prep, it was about controlling the flow of knowledge. The real threat was more dangerous than armies in ancient Egypt. Priests guarded the gates of education. Royal kids, especially future pharaohs, sometimes trained in temple schools, learning hieroglyphs, memorizing religious texts, understanding rituals, plus astronomy and medicine. These weren't skills for the average Joe. Literacy was rare, sacred, and only granted to those destined to rule or decode the divine. Most of this training happened in secret temple schools like those in Kerak or Heliopolis, where knowledge passed from priest to student under absolute secrecy. The curriculum wasn't just religious, it was political. Knowing spells, interpreting omens, or planning ceremonies helped kings control life and death in the eyes of their subjects. Persia had its own elite school system. Noble Persian boys, especially those close to the king, studied in what Herodotus called the king's school, hidden from public eyes. These boys were taught honesty, horseback riding, archery, and leadership. They also absorbed Zoroastrian ethics and the art of governance. This wasn't just for princes, future satraps, generals, and officials expected to run provinces, and armies with absolute loyalty got schooled here too. In India, royal kids might attend gurukuls, secluded forest schools run by wise Brahmins. Commoners rarely got in, but princes often had a single guru teaching everything from the Vedas to martial arts, a full-on education, spiritual, intellectual, and physical, and again, super hierarchical. Knowledge was tailored by class, role, and destiny, even in Greece, where education was a bit more democratic in some city-states. Noble kids in Sparta or Athens got special treatment. Spartan princes entered the Agoge, a state-run military academy. Athenian nobles hired private tutors for logic, strategy, and rhetoric, knowing that winning a battle was only half the game. Winning some argument was way more important. Across all these worlds, knowledge wasn't just taught, it was guarded and passed down like a sword reserved for skilled hands. In ancient times, royal women rarely commanded armies or ruled outright, but that didn't mean they got a sloppy education. In fact, many dynasties treated princesses' schooling with as much strategy and calculation as princes, because royal women weren't just daughters, they were future queens, priestesses, political pawns, and sometimes power players. In Egypt, royal women could wield terrifying power. Queens like Hatshepsut and Nefertiti weren't just eye candy next to Pharaoh. They ruled, built temples, and played diplomacy too. That kind of role demands serious schooling. Egyptian princesses often learned hieroglyphs, chanting, estate management, and sacred rituals from temple priests. Those destined to become wives of the god Amun got even deeper training in rites and theology, way beyond what commoners saw. Sometimes even, they ran the show with know-how that could rival any guy's. In Persia, royal women were stuck behind palace curtains, but don't get the wrong idea, they weren't twiddling their thumbs. These Achaemenid ladies managed vast lands, kept an eye on the treasury, and kept court alliances intact to pull that off. They had to master accounting, diplomacy, and political etiquette. Even Greek historians like Xenophon noted Persian royal women quietly running the backstage politics, proving their education was no joke. Ancient Greece was a bit messier. In Athens, women even from noble families got only a bare-bones education: music, weaving, managing the household, and a smidge of reading. But Sparta, total plot twist. Spartan royal women were raised tough. They worked out, learned to argue like pros, and soaked up Spartan values. Spartan princesses could speak their minds and manage property while their husbands fought wars. And when Spartan men died young on the battlefield, it was usually the women who kept the family legacy alive. Over in India and China, noble women's education mirrored religion and the dynasty's power vibe. In the Gupta Empire, royal daughters sometimes studied Sanskrit, music, poetry, and philosophy skills to boost charm and status. In China's imperial days, empresses and concubines learned Confucianism, calligraphy, and court manners. The politically trained ladies, like Empress Lu or Wu Zetian, went deeper, covering governance, supervision, and the art of ruling. Beneath all the fancy rituals, royal women walked a tightrope. They were expected to shine, not rule, but when the chips fell, they often grabbed power. Then education wasn't just decoration, it was their weapon. If swords won battles, words conquered empires. In the ancient world, royal speaking skills weren't just fluff, they were real weapons. Language, rhetoric, and public persuasion were survival tools for ruling, diplomacy, and just staying alive. So noble kids didn't just learn to talk, they trained to charm, manipulate, and command with words. No one proved this better than ancient Greece, where rhetoric was basically the VIP pass to leadership. Athenian aristocrats learned from masters like a Socrates and later philosophers who taught persuasion as both art and science. Young nobles practiced speeches, public debates, and mastered logos, pathos, and ethos, the holy trinity of classical persuasion. For these would-be rulers, a sharp tongue was mightier than any sword. This mindset spread far and wide. In Rome, noble boys got rhetoric lessons from day one. They memorized Cicero's speeches, studied courtroom tactics, and practiced debates, all while keeping their cool and manners. For royal heirs, this wasn't just palace theater, it was life or death. One poorly timed word could spark scandal. One killer speech could sway the Senate. Even in absolute monarchies, words mattered. In Egypt, pharaohs were seen as divine speakers. Their proclamations carried ritual and legal weight. Royal kids learned formal language and ritual scripts, chanting them during religious parades and state ceremonies. In Mesopotamia, scribal schools taught noble kids not just to write, but to write persuasively, crafting royal edicts, diplomatic letters, and mythic hymns. In Persia and India, language played a different but equally crucial role. Persian princes learned several languages: Old Persian for court, Aramaic for diplomacy, and sometimes Greek or Median. They mastered negotiating, flattering, and threatening, all with perfect timing and tone. Indian royal students, especially under the Maurya and Gupta dynasties, studied Sanskrit epics and philosophical texts like the Arthashastra, which taught tactics in rhetoric, espionage, and diplomacy, even in oral cultures like the Celts and Germanics. Storytelling and rhetoric were power. A prince who couldn't talk well was basically powerless, because power isn't just taken, it has to be spoken into existence. For ancient royals, the sky wasn't just starry wallpaper, it was a calendar, compass, clock, and sometimes sacred scripture. And under that sky, numbers were king. Math and astronomy weren't optional extras for royal kids. They were the foundation. Court performances were serious business, literally a matter of life or death. One slip-up in speech could spark a scandal. A killer speech could sway the Senate. Even absolute monarchies knew words mattered. In Egypt, Pharaoh was basically the original divine influencer. His words were both ritual and law. Royal kids mastered fancy formal language and ritual formulas, chanting them during religious parades and state ceremonies. In Mesopotamia, scribal schools taught noble kids not just to write, but to persuade, crafting royal decrees, diplomatic letters, and mythic hymns. Persia and India had their own language games. Equally crucial, Persian princes learned multiple tongues, Old Persian for court, Aramaic for diplomacy, with a sprinkle of Greek or Median. They studied how to negotiate, flatter, and intimidate with tone and timing. Indian royal students, especially under the Maurya and Gupta dynasties, dug into Sanskrit epics and philosophical texts like the Arthashastra lessons in rhetoric, spying, and diplomacy all rolled into one. Even oral cultures like the Celts and Germanics knew storytelling and rhetoric were power moves. A prince who couldn't talk was basically useless, because power isn't just about grabbing it. You have to talk it into existence. For ancient royals, the sky wasn't just a starry backdrop, it was a calendar, compass, clock, and sometimes sacred scripture. And under that sky, numbers ruled. Math and astronomy weren't optional royal hobbies. They were the bedrock for understanding time, taxes, architecture, war, and fate. Long before Pythagoras made numbers cool, Babylonian nobles mastered a base 60 math system, predicted eclipses, and calculated planet movements with jaw-dropping accuracy. Scribes and priest astronomers tutored princes, teaching them to read cuneiform tables packed with data on stars, weather, and omens. This wasn't abstract math. It literally decided the best times for battles, farming, and royal rituals. Egyptian royal education mixed math into nearly every power play. Pharaohs needed to measure land for taxes after Nile floods. They supervised mega construction projects, temples, tombs, pyramids which demanded geometry and organization skills. Astronomy guided their religious calendar, and princes and princesses learned to track the rising of Sirius, signaling the flood season and New Year. In ancient India, royals soaked up deep math traditions found in texts like the Sulba Sutras and later Aryabhata's work on algebra and planetary motion. Astronomy was both science and spiritual compass, crucial for timing rituals and reading omens. Wise kings asked the stars, educated kings decoded them. The Greeks took these ideas and made them systematic and philosophical. A Macedonian prince like Alexander studied arithmetic and astronomy alongside ethics and logic. Greek royal education, influenced by thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, saw math as the master key to unlocking the universe's order and the king's place in it. Even the Chinese court leaned heavily on astronomy. The emperor was the cosmic middleman, and predicting celestial events legitimated his divine rule. Court astronomers held real power, and princes learned moon cycles, eclipse forecasts, and calendar reforms across all cultures. Educated rulers didn't just boss around people, they ruled time, space, and fate and math, plus the stars whispered their advice. Books might hand you a crown, but a sword kept you on the throne for ancient kings. Education didn't stop at the classroom, it marched onto the battlefield, where guts, physical skill, and tactical smarts mattered just as much as philosophy or politics. Noble kids, especially heirs, grew up with one unspoken truth and fail to defend the kingdom, and someone else will snatch your gig in Sparta. That was the law. Princes entered the Agoge, Sparta's brutal military academy, starting at age 7. There, every comfort was stripped away, replaced by pain tolerance training, endurance, bare-knuckle fighting, and battlefield tactics. No royal exceptions, princes fought, bled, and survived alongside Spartan boys, forging bonds through shared misery that had saved their butts later on the front lines. In Persia, princes learned the 3 noble arts: horseback riding, archery, and telling the truth. Riding wasn't just for war. Royal hunts were tactical drills in disguise. Archery wasn't just a skill, it was a badge of discipline, focus, and martial might. A Persian prince who couldn't shoot a bow, not fit to rule. Indian warrior classes, like the Kshatriya, trained from childhood in Dhanurveda, the science of warfare. Royal kids learned swords, spears, clubs, and bows. They also studied war philosophy through epics like the Mahabharata, which taught not just how to fight, but why, and how to face death honorably. Egyptian and Mesopotamian princes had to be commanders too. They drilled chariot driving and spear throwing. Wrestling was practiced under military officers' watchful eyes. Pharaohs often posed smashing enemies. But that wasn't just for show, it reflected real training. War wasn't theory. Leaders had to lead from the front. In Rome, young nobles learned 2 key virtues: manly courage and discipline. They practiced with wooden swords, drilled formations, and studied military history. Julius Caesar wasn't just a bookworm, he was a tough general. Trained from childhood to balance pen and sword, even Chinese princes, often shielded by bureaucracy, trained in martial arts, archery, and horseback riding as part of their schooling. Rulers were expected to embody both culture and combat, the Wen and Wu, in every empire. Learning war wasn't optional, it was survival for royal kids. A careless word could start a war, a lingering look-spark scandal in ancient courts. Knowing how to sit, talk, and smile was just as lethal as wielding a sword. Protocol wasn't fluff, it was strategy. Behind every bow and banquet was a survival game, and royal education hammered that home for heirs from China to Persia. Court rituals were so strict they could paralyze you. In Han China, princes had to memorize and follow the Li rites, from how to greet superiors to proper mourning cries. One tiny slip could be seen as rebellion. Young princes were taught precise movements, measured speech, and how to read power dynamics in every room. In Persia, royal kids learned the art of court appearance, not just clothes and manners, but handling envoys, dodging insults, and answering calmly under pressure. They mastered indirect communication, skilled in the art of backhanded politics, all while surviving a palace packed with spies and sycophants. In India, Arthashastra, the science of politics and ethics, was a key part of elite education. Texts like Arthashastra spelled out how a king should handle betrayal, use espionage, and balance diplomacy with muscle. Princes were expected to grasp this early because one wrong alliance or naive move could cost them their throne or their life. The Greeks and Romans took royal manners pretty seriously. Athens' elite were schooled in Charist's charm and personal grace, while Roman boys mastered flattery, public behavior, and keeping an eye on the room. Julius Caesar, not just a fighter, he knew how to butter up senators, crush rivals, and read ambitions in a guy's tone. In Egypt, etiquette mixed with the divine. Pharaoh wasn't just king, he was a god. Royal kids were raised to stay calm and dignified 24/7. Their bodies symbolized cosmic order. Even how you stand or sit mattered. Their stillness wasn't apathy, it was silent power, and lurking beneath all that ceremony spies. Tutors taught princes how to test loyalties, gather dirt, and sniff out lies. Because every palace had nosy neighbors, and if you wanted to survive, you had to spy right back. Royal education wasn't just about molding a kid, it shaped the whole dynasty's future. For old school elites, every lesson in logic, war, manners, and language carried the weight of generations. A well-educated king could unite kingdoms, stabilize empires, and carve his name in marble and myth. The unprepared, they smashed it all to bits. Basically, royal schooling was the empire's own high-stakes gamble. Every coin minted, every scroll copied, every tutor hired was an investment in holding on to power, and the pressure on that kid prince, princess, pawn was immense. Take Alexander the Great. His half-the-world conquest wasn't just raw ambition or cavalry tactics, it was years of private lessons from Aristotle, who sparked his hunger for knowledge, debate, and divine destiny. Alexander didn't just conquer, he carried Greek culture, science, and diplomacy across borders, becoming the poster boy for Hellenistic unity. Now, compare that to Nero, also schooled by the Stoic philosopher Seneca. Dude had every educational advantage Rome could offer, but still spiraled into cruelty, paranoia, and wastefulness. His epic failure wasn't just personal drama. It tarnished Rome's image, sparked rebellions, and weakened imperial authority for years. Turns out, education wasn't a guarantee, it was a trial by fire. For royal women, the stakes were just as brutal. A queen could become regent. A princess might be married off to seal peace or claw her way to the throne. The schooling of figures like Cleopatra or Wu Zetian wasn't luxury. It was empire prep, speaking multiple languages, managing the treasury, and navigating deadly court politics kept them alive and in power, even after they died. That royal education's influence stuck around. Many kings became patrons of knowledge, founding libraries and scholarly temples. Their childhood schooling set the standard for generations to come, repeated, refined, and ritualized. In the end, royal education wasn't just about the kid. It was about legacy, keeping the past alive, and ruling the future with brains, not just brawn, because in the ancient world, thrones might be inherited, but staying on them you had to learn how.